Tonight on Let's Talk Motorsport, our special guests are successful 1970s road racer Bobby Rosenthal and a man who took on the world's best at motocross, Jeff Leisk. So stick around. Hi, and thanks for joining us on Let's Talk Motorsport, episode number 12. How's the lockdown going for you out there in the real world? In here, we're trying our hardest to interview a few of the riders from the past and the present and keep you entertained during this rather different time of what we're going through with life at the moment. As we said in the intro, we've got Bobby Rosenthal and Jeff Leisk this week. Bob Rosenthal, probably not the name that comes to everybody's lips when we talk about those glory days of the racing in the 70s and early 80s, but Bob was one of the guys that was at the front, winning races, taking lap records and being a pest to a lot of the other guys on his TZ 750. So let's go and see what makes Bob Rosenthal tick. All right, welcome Bob Rosenthal to Let's Talk Motorsport. Good to see you again, mate.
Good. Nice to see you too, Braxy. Thank you.
Now, let's go. You're still racing, Bob. We know that you're one of the renowned classic racers of Australia. You're still winning races. You're still going fast. But let's go back in time. When did you first get the adrenaline buzz that you've had for so many years?
Well, I'll keep it as short as I can, but a friend of mine took me out to Calder, and I'm not sure whether it was the first motorcycle race meeting there or the second. And I remember sitting with him down in the S's and watching, and all these people coming through and, everybody bending their way through the S's. And I thought, wow, doesn't that look fantastic? I reckon I could do that. And here we are.
How many years now?
Well, I think I started racing about 66. And I went through to 78. I retired at the end of 78, was out of it for 36 years, came back in 2013 on Bob Minogue's Manx Norton, and here we are.
Mate, you'll be pretty good when you get the hang of this, won't you?
Yeah, one of these days I'll get the hang of it all.
But no, in all honesty, with the Island Classic and everything you've been doing over the years, and you're still at the front of the field and you're still battling for wins. You're not just going out there to have a bit of a fun, are you? You're going, and it's once you put that helmet on, it's all systems go. Yeah,
well, I've always looked at it that it can be a dangerous sport. It's a very expensive sport if you haven't got any financial help, and these days I pay for everything. You may as well give it your best shot. And the average time that a person races, their race life length, is usually 15 years. So that's tops, really, I guess. So you may as well make the best of it. You're not going to be able to do it for too long. Although, here I am. I'm actually 72 years old. I'm still doing it. So. And I just thoroughly enjoy it. I love it.
Mate, it keeps you young, and there's nothing like the buzz of a start line, the buzz of a first corner, and just getting out there and we all know camaraderie with the people in the pack. You all have a smile, coming on, all the bench racing that goes with it afterwards. Unless you're into it, I don't think you really could understand what it's all about, eh?
No. I used to say to people, back in the 70s when I was racing for Millage Yamaha, that it's like a drug. Once you've got it in your system, it's very, very hard to get it out. And nothing brought that to me more clearly than getting out at the end of 78, and I had absolutely nothing to do with race. meetings at all. I've never stopped riding road bikes, but I didn't go near a race meeting pretty much for 36 years. And then when Bob Minogue asked me if I'd like to have a run on his Manx, and I remember going out onto the grid that first time and thinking, oh, wow, yeah, I remember this. Fantastic. Let's go.
Now let's go back a bit to when you've mentioned millage a couple of times. From that time at Calder, when you decided to have a crack at it, and you ended up being one of the leading privateers for a while, and then millage picked you up. So talk us through that, because you rode with some pretty, well, you ended up being teammates with some legends of the sport, really, didn't you?
Yes, I did. Initially, I raced Dunstall Atlas, which I still have, by the way. I bought it back a few years ago and restored it. I got to the point where I thought I'd plateaued out on that, so I lashed out and bought a brand new TR2 Yamaha, first of the 350 air-cooleds. And they had a few problems, actually, and that thing nearly sent me broke. I eventually got rid of that, bought a TZ350. I got the first TZ350 into Victoria. And I got a little bit of help from Millages at that time, or really it was their retail arm. And, I'd get parts at cost and so on and so on. Eventually, Jerry O'Brien, who was the general manager at Millages, came to me and he said, look, we'd like to put you on a 750, but we just want to put a toe in the water first. So the deal was that Lynn and I bought the bike, but Millage ran it. And that was their toe in the water to see how it would work. It must have worked okay, because after a year he said, right, I'll get rid of that. We've got new bikes on the way over for you, and away we went. And I was with them for about 5 years. Now, in those times, particularly with the 750 Yamahas, we'd have about 12 Yamahas on the grid, 3 factory Kawasaki's and a handful of RG500s, and then all the guys on TZ350s. So it was, every time you fronted out on the grid, it was serious. There were a lot of very, very fast people out there, the Hansfords, Toombs, Sales, Horsemans, etc., etc. These were all the people who I grew up racing. So, yeah, absolutely fantastic times.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but weren't you a teammate to Mike Harwood when he came out here at one time on a Millage Yamaha?
I wasn't actually a teammate. What happened, I'd just been given a new TZ750E, and Millages decided to run Mike at Bathurst. So Jerry came to me and he said, get your new bike ready for Mike Harwood. We're sending it up to Bathurst, because I didn't want to have anything to do with Bathurst. I didn't want to go near the place. After my brother-in-law Ross Borelli was killed there, I would just say to them at contract time every year, I'll do anything you want. I'll stand on my head in the corner for a day if you like, but I'm not going to Bathurst. And to their credit, they respected that. Anyway, Jerry said, get your nice new E ready for Mike. And I thought, ball dust? I don't think so. So I said, no. I've got to race this thing the rest of the year, and you want me to have a serious crack at the Australian titles. He's going to race it once and he won't care what he does. So Jerry turned around and he said, well, okay, let me put it to you this way. We're sending a new bike up for Mike. Whether it's your E or whether you make the spare bike brand new, I don't care, but send a new bike up for Mike Harwood. So I rebuilt the one that I'd used the year before, from the front wheel bearings to the back wheel bearings, and we repainted it back into Yamaha colours and sent it up for Mike. Yeah, they sent all the blokes in the workshop up to look after it, but from what I heard, Mike didn't really enjoy it very much, and it rained that year at Bathurst, so I think a TZ750 in the rain around there might have been a bit of a handful if you weren't used to it.
A bit of a handful, that's an understatement. Speaking of wet weather, it's been brought to my attention an old race meet at Hume Weir with you on a millage Yamaha. And people of this day are still dumbfounded that you were going down pit straight, down in the hill into Scrub Corner, wheels spinning all the way up and over the crest, and they were still wondering how you pulled it up in time. You won the race quite comfortably, but people are still talking about that to this day, and I suppose it's probably still indelibly stamped in your mind.
Yes, it is. Yeah. Now, we had one terribly unfair advantage. I had a set of full wet Goodyear tyres, and it was teeming that day. And Saturday was the usual Hume Weir, blazing sun. And for those who can remember, the circuit was built in a gravel quarry. So it was always as still as blazes and just blazingly hot sun. You know, it was awful. And anyway, woke up on Sunday morning and it was just teeming. Like it was bucketing rain. So, okay, I had these full wet Goodyears that actually Warren had given us back, Warren Willing. Warren had carried them around for a year. Then I carried them around for a year, so they were at least 2 years old. Anyway, that's all we had. So, you know, the old saying is you run what you brung. So we put those on and thought, well, okay, let's see what it's like. And I remember wheeling the bike out to the grid, and it was like wheeling a motocrosser. You know, the little knobs on the tyres, you could feel every one of them sort of going bzzz. And I thought, bloody hell, you know, how's this going to work, for goodness sake? Anyway, just sat, I was on pole and I sat on the grid and I thought I'll just try a quick burnout and see how much grip's here. So I've whipped it up a little bit and hooked the brake on and dropped the clutch, and it went and just stalled. And Robbie Phillips was right behind me on the grid, you know, and he's yelled out, "Hey, thanks a lot, Rosie," you know. The thing had dug a hole right through the bitumen and sprayed all the stones and rubbish all over it. So I thought, oh, well, you know, there's obviously a bit of grip here. So anyway, off we went, and I got into the first corner third, I think, and I thought I'll just see what it feels like up the back straight, and it just picked itself up on the back wheel and monoed all the way up the straight. So I thought, well, you know what, there seems to be a fair bit of grip here. Let's just sort of try and get into a groove and get going. So I think I won both races that day. The one that we really, really wanted to win was the Ross Borelli Memorial. Ross
that's understandable.
Yeah, Ross was my best friend, and that's really what we went there to win. And anyway, I won it relatively easily, and I thought, oh, I can't believe this, you know. So that was a 10 or 12 lapper, I think, and the main race was 25 laps. And as the day went on, the rain just got heavier and heavier and heavier. I mean, it was just bucketing. So, okay, front out again, same thing again, into turn one, third. I think the first time down the start-finish straight, I put it into the lead. And then my way of coping with wet weather is just soften everything up as much as you can. Soften the suspension up, give it plenty of pitch under brakes and acceleration so that you load the whichever tyre's the one you're working hard as much as you can. And be smooth. Overlap things, be smooth. And anyway, that's what I did, and I lapped everybody up to third, I think. So, and everyone thought I had some sort of trick hand-cut slicks on there. No. They were full wet Goodyears. You know,
and
if you've got the right, if you've got the right tools, the job's just so much easier. So that was the story behind that, and it was a stock standard TZ750D that I did that on. Absolutely stock standard. And those 750s, they'd pull from 7 to 11 from memory. Yeah, 7 to 11. Well, I've just actually ridden my original one over in Holland, and the fellow, Leo, who bought it and restored it, had it set up pretty much identically how we had, and it would pull from 6.5, 7 all the way to 11. No problem. And they're just like a big 4-stroke, really.
Yeah, great bikes. And tell us some of the better championships and positions you got in those days, and who you were racing and competing with for those race wins and titles.
Well, there was a big group of us then, and I think if you took Greg Hansford out of the equation, you couldn't tell where the other half dozen or so would finish. It was that competitive, and everybody's bikes were set up pretty much the same. The ones who really hot-rodded 750s were the ones who didn't finish for one reason or another. Those of us who left them relatively alone, they were a rock reliable motorbike. I mean, you could just race the crap out of them all day and they'd be the same at the end of the day as they were at the start. And, people, I raced quite a bit against people like Toomsy, Ron Toombs, Kenny Blake, Brian Hindle. I can tell you, Brian Hindle was just the best way I could describe Brian. He was a thorough gentleman to race against. He was terrific. You knew he wasn't going to do anything stupid. Kenny Blake was a real Jekyll and Hyde. Ken was just Mr. Nice Guy in the pits, and he was a very close friend of mine. Boy, out on the circuit, he didn't cut too much slack, I can tell you that. Ron Toombs, I think with Toomsy, the tussle was as important to Ron as the win. He really enjoyed somebody being able to bring it up to him. Greg Hansford, Greg was what I would call just a natural born talent. He was one of those guys who, very laconic sort of guy. When he put his backside on a motorbike, I've never seen anybody as quick and smooth in all my life. He was just a born natural. I was talking to Kenny Roberts one day out at Phillip Island and asked him what was the difference between the American riders and the Australian riders then. And he said the American riders ride by what they know, and the Australian riders ride by what they feel. And that applied very much to people like Ron Toombs and Greg Hansford. They just had a feel for it. Like I said, you're either born with speed or you're not. Those two people were. Murray Sale was my teammate in '78. Murray actually won the Australian titles then, and I finished second to him, and we seesawed the lead of the titles all year. And pardon me, Murray was another one of those guys who just got on with it. Murray was your old-fashioned tough guy, and he knew exactly what he was doing. Again, he was just Mr. Nice Guy in the pits, bit quiet, but boy, oh boy, put him on a motorbike and holy mackerel, jeepers, was he quick. Murray actually as a teammate was fantastic. I remember we were at a Tom Phillis meeting at Winton, and 750s around Winton were a little bit of a handful, and it was one of those stupid days where it rained and then the sun came out, and then it rained, and the sun came out. And we were taking wheels out, putting wets in, intermediates in, dries in, and I got to the point where I didn't know what to do. And Murray just wandered over and he said, "Hey, Rosie, you figured out what tyres you're going to use yet?" I said, No, haven't got a clue. And he rolled a pair of wheels my way and he said, "If you put those wheels on, you'll win this easy." And he gave me an intermediate front and a gumball soft slick. And I did. I won it. He finished second. If he had kept his mouth shut, it would have been the other way around for sure. But Murray, as I said, people sort of mistake Murray a little bit because he's very quiet and he's got a fairly unique sense of humour.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, but he was just the most fantastic teammate, and I could never thank him enough. Having Murray Sale as a partner all year was probably one of the highlights of my racing life. It was just terrific.
Man, you got a chance to race and team and compete, share garages with almost a who's who of Australian road racing. So must be some pretty proud moments for you there to be a part of that unique time of Australian road racing.
Yeah, very much so. I really regard that 70s era as the best time in road racing in this country, and not just because of what went on out on the circuit and the fabulous motorbikes that we all had, but the camaraderie in the pits. I mean, if I had a problem, uh, Team Kawasaki would be over. You know, what do you need? What do you want? Or if they had a problem, I'd wander over. And, you know, is there anything I can do to help, fellas? And that doesn't happen today. You know, it does in classic racing, but not from what I see going on with Australian superbikes. It's I think part of what is ruining it is money. You know, a mate of mine back in the States once said to me, Rosie, if you've got any doubt, always follow the money. And I just think there's too many people piling way too much money and too much pressure on these blokes today. And I think they've lost sight of what road racing is all about.
Well, I suppose you're pretty well right in that regard too, because it is, like you said, it was always you needed money, but more so these days as well. And there's everybody sticks to themselves. You see the riders still socialising, don't get me wrong there. But as far as when they're at the track, there is a lot of sheep stations to play for.
Yeah. You know, I suppose too, you know, back in my time, there was actually quite a lot of prize money around. You know, I won several races where the prize money then, and I'm talking mid 70s, was $1,000. There was a lot of money then, and it didn't muck the system up too much. I mean, I've actually made quite a bit of money out of racing, but even those who didn't. Um, there wasn't the jealousy or there wasn't this playing it all close to your chest like I see happening today. And I'm glad I'm not involved in that part of the sport today.
Speaking of being involved, how did, after so many years off the motorcycle of racing, you said you still kept to the road, what made you, even though there was a bike presented to you, as riding it, what was the clincher to go, well, I might get out there and have another crack?
Well, the way it sort of all came about, a friend of mine by the name of Bob Minogue, some of you might remember him from open wheeler Formula 5000 days in Australia. Bob was an absolute gun. Um, for one reason or another, he got out of car racing and he got into motorcycle racing as a sponsor. And he bought a Molnar Manx, a 92 bore Molnar Manx. And the guy who he had riding and he weren't getting along at the time, and it was at a Phillip Island meeting, and the other guy wandered off and left Bob with a big mess to pack up, and I was just helping him put everything away. As you can imagine, there's a fair bit of stuff to pack up. And I said to him, what are you going to do? And he said, well, I've had enough of these prima donnas. He said, I think I'll sell up and get out of it. And I thought, oh, jeepers, that's, you know, pretty sad. And I said to him, look, there's not too many guys, you know, willing to throw a $60,000 or $70,000 motorcycle under some lunatic and let him go and thrash a daylights out of it around a racetrack. What would make you stay in? And he just looked at me and he said, if you come out of retirement and give it a go, I'll consider it. And I thought, oh, okay. So I said, look, I'll tell you what, you go and talk to your wife about it. I'll talk to my wife about it. And let's meet on Wednesday and have a bit more of a chat. And we both did. The girls both thought, yep, let's do it. So I said, okay, let's give it a try. So off we went. And the biggest problem I had, because I grew up with British bikes, so that wasn't a big issue. But the biggest problem I had was trying to figure out how much grip was in these modern Avon racing tyres. And that took a little while to work out. But we did in the end, and Bob and I won our fair share of races on it, and he was quite happy for the couple of years that we did it. And then his wife got very sick, and he decided to get out of it. And I thought, oh, well, that was nice, but there's not too many others around who are prepared to do that for me, so that's probably it. And my mate, Jim Scasebrook, rang me up, and he had a G50 matchless. And he said, oh, it needs a bit of work for this and that. If I send it down, could you do it for me? Yeah, sure. So he sent it down, and I did the setups that he wanted. And then he said, well, you may as well race it for a while, and we'll see how we go. And, oh, yeah, okay, right. And I just loved it. It's actually a nicer motorbike to ride than a Manx Norton. You sit in a G50, you sit on a Manx. And anyway, eventually Jim rang one day and he said, we're moving, and I've got to get rid of a couple of motorbikes, and the matchless is going to go. So he said, before I advertise it, I thought I'd give you a ring and see if you'd be interested in buying it. And I thought, oh, well, yeah. So I said, hang on a second, and I yelled out to Lynn, hey, Jim's going to sell the matchless. What do you think we ought to do? And she said, oh, you better buy it. That's true. That's a true story. So anyway, we did, and here we are today. And by the way, I think it's the nicest motorcycle I've ever owned.
Wow, so that's a big statement after some of the things you've been throwing a leg over.
Oh, yeah, I just love it. I always liked the Yamahas, particularly the 750s, and the last couple of them that I had. By the way, I had 2 A models, 2 D models, and an E. So altogether, we managed to throw a leg over 5 different TZ 750s, which I think was more than anybody else had at the time. But I just have more fun with the G50, and I really enjoy every aspect of it. I love riding it. I love working on it. I just like it. It's just a fantastic thing to do. And being a retired bum, I spend plenty of time on it.
So there's no chance we might see you, if I can arrange a TZ750 at one of these classic meetings, you might throw a leg over that too, because there's a few more of them getting around, thanks to so many different people that have Consortium Racing and Co that have been putting them together. Barry Disburn for one.
If one came my way somehow, yeah, I'd do it. Yeah, I would. I know the bikes pretty well, and having had the opportunity to ride Phil Andrea's bike a couple of years ago, and last year in Holland riding my old one, yeah, I'd do it again. Yeah, the likelihood of that's probably fairly slim, but yeah, if anybody wants to come along and throw a TZ750 under me, I'd do it again, and I'd give them 100% effort.
Well, now that this is out in Let's Talk Motorsport, you never know what might happen. But before we go, just talk us through that, what would have been a very memorable occasion for you to be out there in Holland riding your old bike after so many years.
Yeah, well, again, the way that came about was all by pure sort of chance. Leo Krumminger, the fellow who owns it now, lives just north of Amsterdam. And 3 years ago at Barry Sheen at Eastern Creek, this fellow came up to me and said, oh, look, I think a friend of mine has a TZ750 that once belonged to you because it's got Team Millage stickers all over it. I said, oh, yeah, it probably was, He said, can I put you in touch with him? Yeah, sure, Anyway, a couple of weeks later, I get an email from Leo, and sure enough, it was the bike, and he actually bought it on eBay as just a total wreck, no engine. We sold that one to Alec Campbell in Mount Gambier, and he pulled the engine out, put it in his outfit, and just sold the rolling chassis off, and somehow it ended up back here in Melbourne. Anyway, Leo bought the thing, and it was in terrible condition, no engine. He managed to get an engine from a sidecar racer in Germany, and away he went. And I sent him all the info about it. That particular one had a set of really interesting 4x2 exhaust pipes on it that were made by Kevin Cameron in America. And I correspond quite a bit with Kevin, so I put Leo in touch with Kev, and Kevin still had the construction plans for those pipes. So he sent those off to Leo. Leo built a set, and then away he went. I sent Leo detailed pictures of all the artwork and sponsorship stickers and photos of both sides of the bikes, all the usual stuff. And luckily, I still had some of that stuff. And then he wrote to me and he said, I have the bike entered for a demonstration meeting at Gemmert. Now, Gemmert's just a little farming village about an hour and a half south of Amsterdam. And he said, you should come over and have a ride on your old bike. And I thought, you know what? I bloody well will. Why not? This is terrific. So Jim and Sue and Lynn and I were going to go to Spain last year, so a few quick phone calls and we changed plans and made it Netherlands and Germany instead. And off we went. And anyway, Lynn and I got down to Gemmert, and there's no racetrack there. It's just the farming roads around paddocks, all bitumen and everything, and they put hay bales everywhere. They have a starting gantry. They have timing. You'd swear it was a race meeting. Honestly, it's this sort of demonstration stuff that they do in Europe is huge. It's much bigger than what they do here. So we're walking around through the paddock, and it's just set up like a 1960s pit area, you know. And I looked up ahead, and I could see the bike, you know, and I said to Lynn, bloody hell, look at that, there's my motorbike. So over we went. Leo's just a fabulous bloke, you know, and he couldn't do enough to make us feel welcome. And we actually shared a pit with Nico Backer, the frame man.
Yeah.
So I got to know Nico a bit and talk to him, very interesting bloke. And anyway, time came to go out on the bike, and I thought, oh, this will be interesting. You know, I hadn't really done anything in anger on one of these for quite a while. And Mark, it was like pulling on a soft glove. You know, it was just terrific. So we spent the whole day zooming around. I think I did 3 or 4 sessions on the thing. And at the end of the day, they gave me a trophy for fastest lap of the day. So, how about that?
You still got it.
Yeah.
And I suppose you had a tear in the eye at times when you were riding it as well, eh?
Oh, yeah, I did. Yeah, just memories are terrific. I've been very fortunate that way. About 3 years or so ago, I had a ride on Blakey's, Kenny Blake's TZ350 at a Bonanza, Broadford Bonanza meeting. And that really did, that was very moving for me because Ken was a very close friend of mine. And to sit on his motorbike and go for a ride on it, that was quite emotional, yeah.
Mate, we could talk for ages, and hopefully we'll get you back on the show, Rosie, but and hopefully we see you back on a track. The Australian Historic Championships aren't until, I think, November over at Mack Park. Hopefully you're front up for them on the old 4-strokes, but you never know, there might be a 2-stroke hiding in there in the shed for you, or if not there, maybe the Island Classic.
Well, Phillip Island is without any doubt at all my favourite racetrack. It's I love high-speed stuff, and it's one of those flowing sort of circuits where you've really got to get every corner pretty right. If you don't, and things go wrong, they're going to go wrong in a fairly big way for quite a while, and the end result probably won't be very happy. But I love that. I really liked Phillip Island on 2Z750. So I think I held the outright lap record there at one stage. And as I said, it's much better for me, that sort of place. So I'll be there next year for sure. And as for the titles, yeah, I'll go over for the titles.
All right, mate, thanks for the chat. Been really good. I'm sure there's plenty of more old, once you unlock that fly link cabinet of your mind, we could pull out a few more yarns too, and hopefully we'll see you back here on Let's Talk Motorsport in the near future. So, Rosie, thanks very much for joining us here this time.
Oh, thank you very much, Braxy, for having me on. It's been an honour. Thank you kindly.
No worries, been an honour to talk to you, mate. We'll catch you soon.
Okay, thank you.
What a character Bob Rosenthal is. All those stories, all that experience, and he's still racing, well into his 70s, and out there breaking lap records and still going pretty damn quick. Well, he'd hope to be if we could get back out on track again. But some of the names of the guys he raced with, the Ronnie Toombs, Murray Sale, all those guys. And I'll tell you what, didn't he have a head of hair? He had more curls than Harpo Marx, I'll tell you. What a character. And we'll no doubt we'll catch up with Bob sometime in the future because he's got a raft of stories that he'd like to explain to us. So, from Bobby Rosenthal, who was a legend in the road racing in the 70s, to another legend, well, he's still around. He's just recently retired from KTM after, well, basically almost a lifetime of service to them. But Jeff Leisk, one of the premier guys in Australian motocross in the last 30 or 40 years. Got to the top, basically, won Grand Prix against the best in the world. The Flying Freckle, as he was used to be called, and still called that as well. But now let's catch up with Jeff as he retells and relates some of the stories of old in his experience on the world motocross scene and in America and in Australia. Well, Jeff Leisk, thanks for joining us. So let's talk motorsport and a whole new way of life about to start for you.
It is, yeah. I've been, I guess, on that treadmill for quite a long time, running pretty fast, and ready for a change, ready to slow down a little bit.
Well, I'm glad you said slow down because knowing you as long as I've done, I don't think you're going to be slowing down. You might have a little bit of an interlude. Unfortunately, you can't go away on a family holiday at the moment with the way things are going. But have you got any other things in the pipeline that you can discuss or give us a hint that you might be doing a few things?
Look, I suppose all I can say is the plan is there isn't one, which is pretty unusual. But no, I've got a lot of little personal projects I want to pursue and haven't really had time to do in the past. You know, I'm fairly keen to give sailing a try, and I sort of started that off and never got to really finish it. And so I'm pretty keen to sort of follow that and, really enjoying my mountain biking at the moment. So both without a motor and with a motor. So I'm really enjoying that. And obviously it's just really time with the family, something I haven't really had a lot of in the last 20 years, so I'm looking forward to that.
An interlude over in America. How did all that come about and all that lead into getting into the World Championships?
Yeah, well, really it eventuated because I had two really strong seasons in the Mr. Motocross Championship in 84, 85, and in fact, I think in the 85 season, I think I dropped one moto in the whole Mr. Motocross, and so I sort of felt like after two fairly dominant years, I'd done all I wanted to do, and really, it was just going to be a matter of repeating, and that wasn't really that interesting for me. And I was very familiar with the US. I was going there actually since I was 14, I think it was, back in 79. So, and I always went back to the US for preseason training, and so I'd sort of built up a few contacts, and it seemed like the logical place for me to go rather than Europe. And I was lucky enough to strike up a deal with American Honda with a guy called Dave Arnold. And it wasn't a huge deal. I mean, basically it was some bikes and parts and a reasonably good bonus program. So what it really meant was I'd have to get out there and perform, and when I think back on it, I didn't have a budget. I had a van and I had a lot of passion. I had Buddha, Peter Laskowski by my side as a mechanic, and basically it was, get out there and race and perform, and if we performed, we could get to the next race. And when I look back on it, it was a pretty good way to do it.
Well, it sure was, and probably in hindsight, you couldn't have picked a better grounding to go over there because at the time, the American Championship was just as strong as the World Championship, wasn't it? A very level, a high level of competition.
Oh, very much so. I think, to probably prove that point, back in the sort of mid-late 80s, the Americans, whenever there was the Motocross of Nations or so on, the Americans were the dominant riders. It's not really the case today, but I think if you look at the records, they speak for themselves, and the Americans were very, very strong. during that period. So, that was a good time to go there. It was some really good racing. The Supercross had been up and running for quite a while. It was already, super strong. Anaheim Stadium, 70,000 people. In those early years, you actually had to ride qualifiers to get into the qualifiers to then try and make the main event. So I think in the 250 category at Anaheim, there were 75 riders qualifying for 20 spots in the final. So, and if you weren't good enough, you went home. There was no concessions, and that's how cutthroat it was over there.
Well, did you have a bigger target on your back because you came over there with a couple of Mr. Motocross championships to your honour and thinking, oh, well, we'll show this Aussie what really happens over here and punt you off a few times?
Yeah, well, I suppose, to be honest, the Americans, Australians weren't really known. Australian racing wasn't really on the map as far as motocross went. And so, they're just kind of like, who's this kind of weird guy from Australia? And, look, if he gets in my way, well, we're going to punt him off. And, in fact, that's what happened. Early on, I learned some pretty hard lessons in the first few races. But, okay, I learned how to play the game. And then once I knew what the rules were and where the boundaries were and basically to have eyes in the back of my head if a rider was close behind you. You knew they were going to attack in a most aggressive way. And once you learnt that, you got on with the job.
So did that, in a way, was a backhanded help to you for the World Championship? Because instead of going from, say, Australia to Europe, going with that detour to America, did it toughen you up and give you a better arsenal, I suppose, an armament to go in when you attack the World Championship?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I mean, the American racing was as tough and as aggressive as anywhere, and in fact, I would have to say probably more aggressive than what you'd see in Europe.
And what about the difference in the tracks as well? Was there much difference into an American style of track, Australian style of track and the European style of tracks? Because I've seen a couple of motocross tracks over there. One that we'll get into which is my favourite, but they seem to be more on the side of a hill than a lot of other places you see around the place.
Yeah, well, I guess the US racing is always going to have the Supercross influence. So the style of the tracks, there's always going to be a bit more airtime. There's actually going to be double jumps, kind of in a natural format, and some of them, quite large, as we still see today. So, yeah, definitely a little bit different style of track to what you'd see in Europe, and the way that they groom the circuits was also different. The Americans tend to really heavily displough the tracks and get a lot of water into the tracks. I think one thing that a lot of people don't kind of put on the sort of on the radar there a bit is, in the US you're racing in the middle of summer, and I know in anything Northern Hemisphere that is the case, but obviously some parts of the US are extremely hot and humid, and the conditioning that you need to kind of survive in 30-plus minute motos in that really high heat, that really does make a difference, and you've really got to condition yourself to handle that.
Now, going on to, I think when people think of World Motocross, the track they do think about is Namur in Belgium, there on the Citadel. I went there once because I was living there for a time when I was running around doing the World Championship stuff. That reminds me of a motocross version of the Isle of Man in a way, but in short and condensed and complete madness, where you're racing through these trees and you're coming out onto the bitumen and going past pubs, and it's almost like Spa or the Belgian road race tracks. But that place in Namur is just completely mental to go and watch it. There was just that tunnel of trees that you guys were racing through, but at the same time, a lot of it was flat, very fast, open stuff as well.
Yeah, that was definitely a unique circuit, historic. The Citadel arena where the start was, and the track kind of looped around through there every lap, and there was a multitude of spectators. So the track had a lot of different dimensions, as you said, kind of dodging trees through the forest, jumping down through the forest, sort of fairly narrow gaps there with the trees, and then up onto the bitumen, past the pub there, where I think there was a classic moment with Hakan Kalkvist when he actually pulled up for a beer at the end of his career and still managed to win the race. So definitely a unique circuit, and one that I'm thankful that I got to race at, because it's obviously no longer around, and that was epitomised European racing, I think, and particularly what was there in Belgium, where the sport has a huge grounding.
Any one Grand Prix that stands out to you over the years that you were there?
Oh, look, in Europe, there's a lot of unique circuits. Another one comes to mind is San Marino, which is up on the mountain there, side of a hill. Pretty unique circuit. I suppose. Look, anytime you have a milestone victory or someone, always tends to be an event that'll stand out in your memory. And for me, it was a track called Ruska Santa in Finland, where I won my first Grand Prix, and I think, in fact, I was the first Australian to win a motocross Grand Prix. So, that for me always stands out. And I guess the conditions of that circuit, a little bit sandy, which suited my style, being a West Australian sand groper, as we're known as. I was pretty comfortable in those conditions, and to sort of get my first Grand Prix there, that's obviously always going to stand out. But there's some other tracks I always enjoyed racing in France. I always enjoyed the atmosphere, the spectators roaming into the circuit with a baguette underarm and a bottle of red wine to watch the races. So that sort of passion for the sport is something that, as a competitor, you really breathe it in and use it. As sort of use it as part of that atmosphere that gets you excited about racing.
Now, another thing you got excited about racing was jumping onto a dirt on four wheels as well. And one of your main, I think it was about the same time as one of your main rivals in the motocross got into the four wheels too, was Stephen Gore. What did you two almost mirrored each other at that time too, didn't you?
Yeah, certainly our careers and backgrounds are similar. I guess I got into motorcycle racing through Speedway. My father and my uncle were Speedway bike racers at the famous Claremont Speedway, and obviously I grew up around that environment and going to the Speedway, and then eventually watching the sprint cars race, and that was something that always caught my eye as a kid, and thought one day I'm gonna give that a go, and I finally when I sort of wound back from my career in Europe. I got an opportunity to try out a sprint car, and it's quite an addictive activity, and it's something I pursued for quite a number of years, to be honest. And I'm still passionate about that today. And I was lucky enough to win a state championship, and I was did pretty well in the Nationals one year, finished fourth, and sort of qualified on the front row there with Gary Brazier. And, it's a tough sport, but it's something that I also enjoyed getting into.
Jeff Leisk, thanks for joining us for a short time here on Let's Talk Motorsport. We could talk for hours and everything, but hopefully we can get you back on the show. Maybe when you're down here in Melbourne, you can come into the studio one time.
It's been a pleasure, Braxy, and obviously I've known you for a long time, and there's some good memories, some good history there. So no doubt it'll be great to catch up for a cold one.
If you'd like to see more clips or find out where you can listen to our podcast, even visit our social media links and upload your race bike, car or kart to show us what you've got, there's only one place to go, and that's letstalkmotorsport.com.au, your one-stop shop for everything with the lot. Well, old Leisk, a real character, isn't he? Some great stories. We could go on and talk about his experience on the dirt for ages and ages, and no doubt we'll catch up with him. We wish him all the best in retirement. Hopefully see him at a track soon when we get back to some sort of normality, but I reckon you might see him on a few sailing boats. So all the best, Jeff, and thanks for the memories, and thanks for being a part of Let's Talk Motorsport. So that brings us to an end of this show. We didn't have a lot of racing on, but when you've got characters like that, well, why not? And for next week, well, we mightn't have any racing in the present, so we're going to stick with the past and relive some of those glory days when we talked to Stu Avant, the Kiwi who's been living in Australia for a number of years, and also one of the guys that really put his name into the record books of Australian road racing back in the 80s, Michael Dowson. So join us next week on Let's Talk Motorsport, and see you then.